So I was just doing some programming for my client. I have removed the details here so it's not sensitive, but I think I've kept enough that the abstract idea is retained. And I think it's pretty useful. It's not a thing I've been using for a long time. I've probably been using it for about a year and a half to 2 years. And I think it's a very kind of useful design pattern to have in mind when working on a lot of stuff. So right now, what I'm trying to do is I want to store metrics. And a metric can be anything. It's right now I'm getting them from queries from my database. And I'm trying to get these metrics to represent what's changing in the state of my system and if it's changing in the way I want it to. Because right now I have a number of jobs running that are changing the state of my system in many different ways, and I need to kind of make sure that these are progressing as I expect them to, or if they're not, I go and fix the issue. And I'm also checking, I have a number of scripts running, and it's a bit overwhelming, and it's definitely not something that I would consider to be reliable to just checking through these logs of these scripts. So what I'd like to do is create a framework in which I have easy access to the data, and I can plot it on kind of a simple graph and see if things are progressing as I expect. So, and because these metrics behave in a very similar way, what I've done is I've implemented these in a very abstract manner that works very neatly with the only logic actually taking place in one place. So I think if I look at the metric job here, it's very simple and hopefully illustrates what I'm trying to do. So I want to store historical metric data every 5 minutes. So after this job is complete, I sleep for 5 minutes. I get a new metric item, which can be seen down here. Get new metric item. A metric item looks like this. This is how it's stored as in the database. I have a date, and then I have a JSON object. I use a JSON object because I think this is very flexible, and I'm going to have these metrics changing a lot, so I don't want to rigorously enforce anything. I also think I'm going to be using this a lightweight node server and React to display this, visualize this information. So obviously JSON is a very natural choice here. And yeah, so this is what I want to do. I want to get the metric items, I want to insert them, and I want to sleep. Archiving historical data every 5 minutes. So when I look in this metrics item, I've got this one line of logic, which is basically doing all of the metric population. This is the only sort of logic we have here, and it is using something called a metric. Now, a metric is an enum I created earlier. And this enum has a number of fields. This is the only 3 pieces of information I need to distinctly run the logic. So instead of programming separate logic for each metric, I have one line of logic, and then I just pass in this bundle of data. And this enum represents, it's essentially a constant value, the metric's name, and then 3 corresponding constants to the metric, because each metric of this type will never change in these 3 ways. So I don't want to give it the possibility to. I don't want to pass these into the method, because then in the future, if I try and get this method and I say, oh, is this a float, or is that a double, or is it a long, then it's kind of, I have to know and I have to check. Whereas if I put it into this metric object, it's archived forever, and when I create it, it's locked in, basically. So these metrics have 3 items, one of which is a JSON key. So because I'm storing the metrics value, because I'm storing the metrics value as a JSON, I need to have a key to represent it, which corresponds to its name. I then have the fetching operation name. This is where it gets a little bit more complicated, but basically this name is corresponding to a query I've previously written. So on the right side here, we can see these queries. These queries are something I've written. It's very simple. It's just selecting a number. It's a result type of an int, and it's going to use this ID to refer to that query to essentially say this is the source of the data. And because I'm getting all these from the database, that's why I can use this consistent logic, because they're all just essentially the only thing that's changing is, what I want to store it as, the JSON key, where I want to get it from, and the type as well, because we need the type information for Java, because obviously it's statically typed, and I want to make sure I'm not just getting objects, right? I want to make sure I'm being specific here. And so that's the final thing I specify. And this is used, I store that as the type, and then I use this type to pass that in here, because this method here, select one, something I've made myself as well, it will basically open a session from the database, and will then, using generics, I've specified that it will return this type. So then here, the select one will correspond. So you see the return type is a question instead of an object, so I don't have to do any casting or anything like that. Otherwise it would return an object, and I say, okay, well, this metric is an integer, so I have to cast this one to integer, and then I have to do this logic like if metric equals metric 1, that's an integer, and if metric equals metric 2, that's a float, and then I have to put all this separate casting logic, and it's just a real pain. So using those three bits of value, I basically say, okay, I've created this JSON object, I get the JSON key for the metric, I then run this to get the JSON value of the correct type, and that's it. And then puts it into this monitoring metrics item, which is then inserted into the database. So I hope, actually, I'll create one more metric to illustrate why this is useful. So let me just go here, and I will make a float this time. So let's say percentage. I'm going to remove this afterwards, but I'll make it something very abstract for so percentage complete, let's say, or something. So then I would have percentage complete, select percentage complete. I would then write a query on the right side to get the the percentage complete, whatever that would mean, selecting the average of this selecting the total of this divided by the total of that, something similar to that. And then I want that as a double because it is going to be a percentage. I need to get rid of this, add a comma there. But this is the beauty of this, is like now I've done that. I don't have to check any specific casting logic. I don't have to write any if statements. I don't have to write anything new because it will all be processed by this. And so in the future, as I'm adding more metrics, because as things go on, I'll have new bits of data, new bits of state, new jobs are doing different things, and I'll want to check new things. And then when I want to do that, I can spend 30 seconds just writing a query, adding this here, and not having to worry about the results because I know for sure that it's going to work because it's been working for other things. Yeah, so I hope that was somewhat useful, and maybe there's points you can use that in the future. Again, I'm recording this for maybe future mentees. Maybe some of my current mentees would be interested, and maybe there's some other people who are interested. Hopefully that's kind of useful. Cool.